AI is getting absurdly powerful. It can be incredibly useful. I've used ChatGPT to write code, proofread things I've written, and even to tell me what kind of dog I would be if I were a dog. It said Border Collie Rottweiler mix for some reason. No two ways about it, AI has changed the way we live and work. But it's not all good news. From the relatively benign proliferation of AI-generated stories in magazine editors' inboxes, to the use of deepfakes to defraud people, it's clear that AI tools are powerful weapons in the hands of bad actors, and not just Steven Seagal.
Bing, bang, boom.
Averse to bad outcomes as they are, generally, regulators have been all over this. But they haven't always responded in the same way or with the same philosophy in mind. Illinois regulated the use of biometrics way back in 2008, but rolled back some provisions in 2024, limiting damages. An executive order signed in 2023 by then-President Joe Biden required Homeland Security to define security guidelines and some agencies to appoint AI-focused executives. But this was rolled back in 2025 after the election. Since August of 2024, EU countries have been subject to the AI Act, while the UK is still working through its approach. It looks like a piece of legislation may require the creation of a new regulatory authority, but we're not sure. The point isn't that you need to understand all of these right now, it's that there are so many different regulatory requirements that you'll be subject to based on where you operate or even where you think about maybe possibly operating at some indeterminate point in the future. Regulators have long arms. The EU often fines American companies. Doesn't matter where you are, you're going to have to deal with this. If you don't adhere to the AI Act, for example, the penalty fine the EU is prepared to levy is 35 million euros, or 7% of your total annual worldwide turnover for the preceding financial year, whichever is higher. For Apple, that could be $27 billion. You can buy a lot for $27 billion. In fact, that's roughly the price of one LinkedIn. Don't you think they'd rather have a LinkedIn than pay the EU? It's funny. They paid like $27 billion, but I made an account for free. Whatever, you're not booing me. I stole that from the internet. So that's pretty doom and gloom. I get it. But the first step to action is understanding. There are a few key insights that will help you make the best decisions given the information. Ready? Editors, if you wouldn't mind. First things first. You've got to cut through the regulatory noise. I know that's easier said than done, but it's an important activity. You'll want to think about what it is that regulators care about and anticipate how your deployments are likely to impact your compliance status. We recommend a risk-based approach that's relatively broad-based and will allow you to be compliant while managing complexity effectively. You might consider the NIST AI RMF, ISO 42001, or the EU AI Act as places to start. You'll want to understand these compliance frameworks, but also your specific requirements as they relate to AI and as they exist more generally. PCI, SOX, GDPR, these are all relevant here. Next, your intended purposes and visibility are critical. You will need to know what you've got going on in your environment, how it's being used, and what your business expects from you. We like to think of it as a compass that guides AI systems towards trustworthiness, accountability, and ultimately regulatory alignment. If you don't know why, you might get stuck on what regulations apply. Be sure to be collaborative as well. Other people know important things too, you know. A third key piece of advice is to manage complexity with structure and do your best to avoid duplicating effort. Frameworks are key here. You might not be able to see directly what's coming, but you can certainly align with your leadership and with people who do know what's going on. Make sure you move at the speed of the most stringent regulation, and in some cases you'll get two birds stoned at once. Break two birds' backs with one straw. I can never remember the phrase, but you know what I mean. Up next is the importance of self-assessment. Make sure the powers that be are aware of the risks, are engaged in periodic control evaluations, and agree on the risk level that you're trying to comply with as you proceed. There might be exceptions, that happens, but you should be prepared to manage them and to facilitate further productive conversations. It's probably not your job to accept risk on behalf of the organization, but you should be able to frame the problem well. Finally, you'll want to prioritize effectively. You can't do everything at once. You're not Inspector Gadget. Do people still know Inspector Gadget? Oh, okay, well, I'm going to continue with the video and you guys brainstorm something better.
Phew. Go Gadget, save the day again.
Make a list, check it twice, and transform it into a roadmap for measurable progress in line with your overall goals and objectives. If that sounds interesting, stick around. We've got an expert joining us. The aforementioned expert. I'm here with Safayat Mohammed, who is a research director in our security and privacy practice who knows everything there is to know about AI compliance. Welcome, Safayat.
Thank you.
So my first question, the thing that's really been eating me as I've been reading and preparing for this shoot, is What happens if I don't do this? I outlined a couple of consequences, Apple having to pay $27 billion, a ridiculous number like that. But I feel like that's probably not normal. So what happens if I just say, it's a changing landscape. I'm just going to wait a little bit. Why should I care about this?
So I listened into that part of your video, and to couple with that, there's a lot of conversation around deregulation as well. So organizations might just sit back and think that there is a tide that's going against compliance right now, and they might not need to worry as much. The thing is, with deregulation or just choosing to wait around for the right act to come within your jurisdiction before you gear up on compliance, the potential for reputational risks don't go away. And deregulation doesn't absolutely mean no regulation at all. So just as you were mentioning in the Illinois bill, some provisions have been drawn down so that organizations don't face as much obstacles or fear of being penalized. But that doesn't mean the entire law went away. You still have to abide by the requirements and compliance obligations that are put forth through those laws. And then they can be very sectoral. They can be regulatory guidances rather than comprehensive laws as the EU AI Act, which is not to say those are not coming in. If not at the federal level, we are already seeing that at the US state level, with Colorado bringing in an AI Act. So that trend is not going anywhere or anywhere soon. It is here to stay.
So when I think about this further then, and some of the things that I've read about and that I've heard, it suggests that this could get quite complicated. So let me give you a scenario. Let's say I'm a large organization with business all over the world and I'm headquartered in Chicago, right? I'm subject to US federal law. AI regulations that might be passed there, executive orders, things like that. I'm subject to Illinois state law, both AI specific and non-AI specific. I could be subject to like Cook County ordinances or municipal city of Chicago ordinances as well. And if I have European data subjects who interact with my services, I'm subject to GDPR and then the EU AI Act. It sounds like there's really a lot that you would need to take in. So first of all, am I right in assuming that you would be subject to those things or similar things? Is my scenario broadly correct? And second of all, how do you manage such complexity? I don't think I could do that.
Great point. Taking that example, if the organization's footprint is so widely spread, there could be overwhelming amount of laws and regulations that we might have to parse through. And then that's why it is highly advisable to always keep HR, legal, finance in these conversations when we are trying to identify what kind of compliance requirements might be obligated on us. However, when it gets to that overwhelming amount of legislations and guidances, it might be your best option, again, to go back to your point, cut out the regulatory noise. Let's look at what the best standards and frameworks are out there that take all of the core components of compliance and give us controls with objectives to meet that we can integrate into a best of breed framework that aligns with responsible AI, trustworthy AI to deploy, and then put our AI investments and maybe even our AI entire portfolio through the lens of those standards and framework to identify what we need to do to get to a viable strategy. And the reason I am falling back on the standards and guidances, the leading frameworks out there like NIST AI RMF, like the ISO 42001, is that they align very well with the principles that organizations like OECD rely on to give effect to regulatory guidances that eventually might end up being legislations as well. So if you look at it from a data protection, privacy, or AI compliance perspective, you will see a lot of these principles are very well aligned.
When I think about accountability, obviously you can't outsource that, right? You're always going to be accountable for the decisions that your organization has made. So I can look to a best practice framework like a NIST or an ISO, and that can get me most of the way there, but maybe there's some stuff around the edges that I need to work on. A question that I have, based on everything you said and based on everything that I've read, is where does this live? Because, I got into IT because I like turning nerd knobs. That doesn't mean that I understand AI regulations, that apply to, the European Union or New Zealand or something like that. I got into HR because I like doing employee relations. That doesn't mean that I understand technical changes in regulations that could impact some of the tools. That's my IT department's job. I got into law because I like reading really long things and arguing with people, right? Not because I understand technology particularly well. Which one of those stakeholders should be leading this?
Let's just quickly pick on that example of HR. Now, in any organization, HR might be involved with employees within the organization, as well as independent contractors, business affiliates who take part in the organization's activities and the bottom line, but they are not under the organization's umbrella. Does that absolve HR to not know about these independent contractors? They still have to govern and manage every single person that comes within the organization's threshold and operate in some sort of authority and with authorization. So we cannot outsource that responsibility from the HR perspective. We cannot say the independent contractor is responsible for anything that might go sideways while working within the umbrella of the organization. Same concept within compliance accountability, be it AI, security, or privacy. Regulators are of the opinion that you cannot outsource your accountability. Even if you are bringing in third-party provided softwares that have AI capabilities, you are still obligated to understand the technicalities, the performance metrics, and have some sort of human oversight to manage that application or software or infrastructure for that matter. So where should this live? The approach that we bring in our blueprint is that even though responsibility can be assigned to one person, and in many cases it should, so that traceability and the overall responsibility and accountability can be followed through and kept tabs on. However, getting to that stage of who do we assign this responsibility is something that can be decided on collectively. So the concept of having a AI working group or a steering committee is a great idea in a situation, and this should be driven by cross-collaboration. So any business unit who wants to bring in AI capabilities in their department might have to go through the IT procedures and the third-party vendor management procedures to get that software solution in. But if they are going to be the point business unit who are going to be using this, then they have a responsibility in managing it as well. So if we have counterparts looking into that system from the IT side, we have individuals owning some of the responsibility of managing it from the business side, and they come together to make sure that there's visibility, there's a structured approach to how we are going to implement the human oversight factor, the human element, how we are going to keep tabs on if how it's performing is in alignment with the performance metrics that we have set out before deploying it. That's the kind of approach that would bring in most benefits for that organization. In certain scenarios, if the organization is much smaller and we need to guide this approach from a single point person, then I do feel like IT would be best positioned to look at it as a system ownership perspective. But then again, constant feedback from anyone using the system would still be necessary to keep tabs on the performance metrics, the evaluation of the and verification of validation methods. Those will need to be done through someone who has the technical know-how.
Whoa. All I want to do is use Microsoft Copilot. If I'm just buying a SaaS application off the shelf, do I really have to think this deep and hard about it? Is there a difference between building my own AI solution and just buying one? How do I think about that?
So the build versus buy is a different conversation altogether. But if we can just hone in on the rolling out Copilot, Microsoft Copilot in an organization. In many situations with many members of Infotech that I've spoken to, I've gotten this vibe where they think this is very low risk. Why do I even need to worry about it? It's just like Microsoft Office Enterprise that I used to roll out like 10, 15, 20 years ago. It should be the same approach. But did you know just before Copilot came out, it was known as Bing Chat. And it was openly available to everyone. And then within the enterprise Office Suite umbrella, it got the Microsoft Copilot title. And then there were additional features of it that allowed organizations to keep the data within its bounds and data environments. But that's not always the case. Depending on which solution, which grade of license you are pursuing, it might vary heavily. So one of the core concerns that we found as we were doing a risk assessment on Copilot was, if you are asking Copilot a question and then it decides that it has to send this question out to the Bing Chat version, the open version of Copilot, then your data that you're putting in the search query might be going outside of your organization. And depending on how well you have trained your employees, there could be the risk of confidential information, business confidential information being in that search prompt, or personally identifiable information, which are highly advised against. So just before deploying Copilot, I think organizations should still take a step back, take the steps necessary to identify what are the features that they want to roll out. If they will have visibility into all these search prompts that are coming through from across the organization's employees, will someone at the back end have visibility into that? Could that impact the privacy of these employees? As well as what the approach would be if the outputs of Copilot didn't align with what was being expected. Microsoft does very well to publish their security assessments, certifications, so that organizations can do their own due diligence. So embarking on that journey of due diligence, doing the risk assessments and having a strategy or a compliance strategy for their overall AI deployments will still be a good idea.
What are the organizations that make mistakes in this? What are they doing wrong, right? I was thinking about this sort of from a glass half empty, glass half full kind of perspective, and I'm going to go half empty today. What are people doing incorrectly as they seek to be compliant with these AI regulations, or what mistakes do you see commonly?
Rather than pinpointing on mistakes or incorrect behavior, it's more of a general approach in most industries, but I do feel like it's more driven by how businesses operate than how it ought to operate. So businesses are driven by their bottom lines, and to enable that, most organizations will run into a situation where they are deploying first, or they know what the capability that they need, and they want to source it, make that available to their employees before thinking what are the due diligence steps that we need to take. And then many members we speak to are on that journey. They already know which solution they're going to go for, how they're going to roll it out, but the documentation that should accompany this deployment, should the regulators come knocking on their doors, to have those documentation ready, to be able to give the regulators visibility into what the organization has done before deciding this particular AI deployment should be rolled out. I think that's the basic human nature or organizational nature that I should refer to, that would be very good if it changed. But in many circumstances, what we end up doing is taking what the end goal should be. So taking a future back approach. So this is where we want to end up in 6 months. We have kind of decided as business that this is the route to take. These are the solutions to deploy. Now, what can we do by backtracking to point A and getting all those due diligence steps done? For example, developing that AI portfolio that gives the organization visibility into across the enterprise where investments are being made to deploy AI. Because I cannot protect something I don't know I already have in my organization, right? and then being able to align those deployments with our best of breed responsible AI framework for developing the compliance strategy. So at that level, we are defining controls, we are identifying the legal and regulatory obligations, and then mapping them back to controls and objectives set out by the leading frameworks, or organizations might choose to develop their own framework depending on which standards and regulations apply to them. And then from there on, we will have to identify what gaps there are based on the lens we are bringing in of the controls and what we have or will have in this scenario in the organization in terms of rollouts, and then what is necessary to get this up to speed of compliance or responsible and trustworthy AI. So having those tasks and initiatives defined and prioritized effectively will drive us towards the due diligence factors as well as that comprehensive strategy, taking a holistic approach rather than system level approach.
So this is a lot to get your head around. There's a lot of different steps, a lot of different potential folks involved. The stakes are high. If you get it wrong, you could be fined. You could have a bad reputation in your industry. You might not be able to attract staff, all doom and gloom. But I understand that we have an approach to this as part of this blueprint on AI compliance that you've put together with your colleagues in our security and privacy practice. So can you tell me a little bit about what we can get done in 4 days as part of this blueprint? Walk me through some of those steps.
Absolutely. So in the four-day approach to Infotech's workshop for AI compliance, what we are going to look at is exactly what I was mentioning in my last point. On day one, we will focus on creating that visibility. So we will meet with the core groups from the organization as well as extended stakeholders, maybe from business units, to learn about what kind of AI systems and applications they're rolling out or using day to day in their environment. That enables us to identify which are some of the high-risk systems at a precursory stage, right? So if we want to take a deep dive, we can do risk and impact assessments in a very detailed way. And we do offer that particular capability to our members as well. So if they want to take a handful of AI systems and applications that they want to put through the lens with a deeper dive to identify what kind of risk levels we are looking at, that can absolutely be done within those 4 days as well. But the initial approach in the compliance tool that we have is aligned with the high-risk systems identified by the EU AI Act, previously announced ADA in Canada, AI and Data Act, which is right now kind of sidetracked a little bit. Also, from a US federal perspective, there was talk last year about a American Privacy Rights Act, which kind of touched on AI regulation as well. So when we looked into those prospective legislations and the one that has already been enacted, we identified that there are some thresholds that they set. So to do this very quickly, we have identified those 8 or 9 thresholds and that define what is could be considered high risk. From that perspective, if we can identify the risk levels, taking a risk-based approach to compliance assessment becomes simpler. So from that lens, we can give a choice to our members. If you have say 2 high-risk AI capabilities and all of your other AI applications are low to medium risk, do we really need to implement each and every control that are suggested by the leading frameworks to us? Or can we reduce our compliance cost by taking a much leaner approach and handling any exceptions through a further defined process that helps us balance the cost of compliance? So those are the kind of conversations this AI portfolio will facilitate, and that's what we look into in day one of the workshop week with our members. There's also an opportunity to bring in a AI risk and security policy that sets the guardrails for day-to-day use of Gen AI by employees. So that can be taken advantage of as well within the workshop week. But as we move from the day 1 to day 2 activities, this is where we dive deeper into actually doing the compliance assessment. So putting the identified AI systems and applications through the lens of the controls and their objectives to get to that point of trustworthy AI and a compliant AI system to be rolled out. And to do that, we will need to once again deliberate with business units, understand how they're interacting with the systems that they have in place, what kind of data sharing might be going on between the organization's employees and departments, as well as outside of the organization, what kind of external systems or larger AI engines might be connected to the AI capabilities they have within the organization. So we take a much deeper dive into each of those areas to come to that point of, okay, what are our gaps right now that we can close? And the way we take an approach to prioritizing that is, how can we get the most value by putting in the least effort? So those can be our quick wins, and prioritizing effectively allows for that. And then we can divvy up the rest of the identifications, findings, and observations and suggested actions to further waves. And then depending on the organization's appetite, we can divvy that up into 3 or 4 waves spread across 2 to 3 years, however that best fits the organizational structure. So once we get to that point, now we have identified a set of initiatives and tasks that we can put through the lens of either a cost-benefit analysis, if we have the detailed or some abstract amount of costs that we can put into the tool, and do a comparison of what kind of benefits it can be derived from them, and what kind of costs are incurred. That's definitely one way of going about it. But in reality, when we are in those rooms, with meeting rooms with our members through the workshop week, a quicker way of going about it is, you have a better understanding of what your organization needs, the bounds and limits the organization has to operate within. Having those in consideration, which of these items would you be comfortable doing first or in the second wave? And then which are the ones that are not so important or very, very complex for you, that you either will leave for the last or won't do at all? So that kind of abstraction towards solving these problems that the members have at hand and need some sort of direction and guidance on within that workshop week is facilitated and streamlined. But to close off on that, it still is a baselining exercise, because we cannot solve the issue of getting to 100% compliance within a week, within a year or two, let alone a week. So that's why I always mention it to my members that this is a baselining exercise, and ITRG as an organization, us as advisors, will support you beyond the workshop week in implementing the observations and findings that we have recommended, the action items, and in anywhere we can keep on building that relationship and keeping our members engaged in those implementations. I think that's the goal with the workshop.
Excellent insight. Thank you so much, Safayat.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. It was great to be here.
And if you enjoyed this, please check out the full blueprint at infotech.com.